everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Town Politics, where we bring together our friends, movement folks, and journalists to discuss everything happening in the city and county level about politics. Today, we want to welcome one of our good friends and comrades, Alvina Wong, to join us to talk about Oakland Rising's action, ongoing work around public safety. But we want to welcome Alvina. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and what do you do in the world?
Thanks. Yeah. My name's Alvina. Use she, they pronouns. I'm the base building director at the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. Also, longtime East Oakland resident, pretty close to the Coliseum off of 880. And yeah, we've been organizing in Oakland Chinatown for every year. It's a new year, over 20 years. Really working with low-income immigrant, monolingual Chinese immigrants. Our organization broadly also works in Richmond and now South Bay, LA, and like Carson, Wilmington area, really organizing Asian immigrant and refugees for environmental justice. And in all of that, we know that everyone deserves to have a clean, healthy, safe environment to live in. And for that role to happen, we have a particular set of work to bring our Asian folks together to be a part of this multiracial justice movement. So excited to be here, excited to talk with you all, and yeah, happy to get into it.
Awesome. Super excited to have you. And, today's episode is really about public safety and what really is it. And I think it's a very interesting topic, particularly given that it's the number one thing that we hear folks talking about here in Oakland. Mm-hmm. Public safety. I want to feel safe. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been distorted, not only just in recent years, but in the overall history of Oakland. Every time I've ever been oriented to Oakland, even as a child, it's like, oh, we're going to Oakland. So, make sure you take care of your belongings, make sure you don't go in the wrong neighborhood, so on and so forth. But I do think that it's been a narrative that's been primarily shaped around the presence of police and how policing is being used and weaponized to really advance a particular agenda in Oakland. So I want to make sure we spend some time really talking about what really is public safety from our perspective, not just that the narrative that we're given around violence and the prevalence of violence in the community, but broadly, what does it mean to keep people safe or even get to a place where people feel safe? Alvina, from your perspective, how are you looking at public safety? How is your community defining public safety?
Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of ways, especially in the last few years, kind of like diving into this work, we really want to think of it as community safety. Like, what is the sense that you get when you walk down the street? Do you get to walk down the street and just feel beauty, think about what's going on with your life, contemplate your friends and family? Or are you walking down the street constantly looking out around your shoulder, needing to feel like someone's out to get me and I just need to get into the next building safely, right? And so when we think about community safety in that way, it's really about all the parts of like from the point that you leave your house to where you're going next and everything to get there. And so in a lot of ways, I think folks think about safety and public safety as like policing and crime and all these things. But when we think about safety, it's like, how many small businesses are there? Are there parks and trees? When we think about safety also as an environmental justice organization, it's like, do we get to breathe clean air while we walk to the next location, right? Are we at risk of wildfires or sea level rise or, the different tsunami warnings that we've been getting, right? And so in those moments of like what happens in a climate crisis, who do I go to and who looks out for me? And so it's kind of like that whole comprehensive system from like start to end. And a lot of times we think about safety in like the healing arc too, right? Like in a moment of breaking a leg or something, Like, what do? You have to call 911 and wait for the ambulance to come take you to the ER. And so there's this system of like, well, what could have helped you prevent getting a broken leg? So that's
Right.
a whole set of systems. And then you do need to have a point of intervention, right? Like the leg is broken. You need some like direct support. And so in that intervention, which we would say is a lot of the policing part, right? I think there's like an overemphasis on that system or that body of people to like be able to solve the problem. But afterwards, there's a whole process of healing. After you get your leg treated, you know, you have to rest and recover. You have to do PT. You got to retrain your leg how to walk the way it used to walk. And then you're building in that new system and that new learning. Your broken leg never goes away, but it does heal. And I think that's the way we have to look at safety and community safety too, is like crime happens, you know, hurt and harm happen to each other. And there's a whole system to prevent it from even happening. But once it does, there's a whole other system of like healing from it and making sure that it doesn't happen again. And so when we talk with our members, and I think in a lot of ways when they look at it, it's just like, how can I make sure I get home safe? How can I make sure I get home with all my things, right? And I think what we also forget sometimes is that like our things, like our necklace or our cell phone or the money in our wallet, right? Like all of that is memories. Someone gifted me this necklace, or I wanted to give this down to like my grandchildren. Like the cell phone in my wallet, yeah, it has like all my contacts and email, but it has all the photos that I have of that party I just went to that I want to remember. And those are the things that get taken when we think about like fearing for our stuff. And then I think what we have seen in during the pandemic and during COVID is that sometimes the way that we take things from each other has gotten more violent. But overall, it's like we're not aiming to like hurt each other more. But I think there is a bigger and higher desperation to like survive. And I think when we're in that constant survival mode, we're just hurting each other in all the wrong ways. So, anyways.
No, that's all good. I think you're talking to the root causes of violence, right? The people are, you know, in desperate times resorting to taking from each other. It's not ideal, but it is a condition of economic reality, particularly for Oakland, which was, you know, a ground zero for COVID. You know, we I feel like folks forget.
Yeah.
People forgot that like we had more COVID spread than probably any other city in the state at a point. Like we were ground zero. And the economic
People just
fallout.
forgot about COVID.
Well, people have forgotten about COVID.
Yeah,
That's for real.
it's not gone.
It's not gone, that part. I'm like, I just took a COVID test just the other day.
I mean, but public safety is definitely a topic that during our episodes is something that continuously, you know, comes up.
Yeah.
It's related, you know, to so many different things over the past, 2.5, 3 years. We always discussing the narrative of public safety, who is being kept safe. Now we are in a moment where we have new leadership. All leadership has been promising an increase of police, 700, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're safe. And there's so many other, when we're talking about public safety, I was just having a conversation recently. I don't feel safe being around hella trash and dumping, right? And so beautification adds to that. When we're talking about public safety, who exactly is the police keeping safe? I live in East Oakland, and so I don't feel safe when I see numerous police in my predominantly Black and brown neighborhood. That doesn't stop crime, shootings, or anything else. But there's a certain group of people that's doing the call for police, and then there's a certain group of people that's being impacted by those changes.
Right. Right. I mean, I feel like so much of the conversation before was around accountability. I mean, it still is to some extent, But I think a lot of people have shifted it to like, we need more police, you need more, people on the streets, blah, blah, blah. But so much of it is like, when do you call the police? When something happens. And so there's all the stuff beforehand that they feel like the police presence will help prevent. Oh, if I see more cop cars around, then like maybe there'll be less robbings or people. But, it's like, if you're out to do something, you're going to figure out a way to do it, whether the police are there or not. And so is there any real research that has shown that like more police presence means that less crime happens? Not really.
The data
right?
is there.
Yeah.
But I think the point that is true is like when a community knows each other well and a community takes care of each other, you have your neighbor saying like, hey, there's something kind of weird happening in front of your house, right? Or you have a neighbor like walking their dog and then something looks kind of fishy and like, hey, what are you doing here? Right? That's what it is when we take care of each other and when we know each other and we care about each other enough to do that. But we've been so disconnected with gentrification and people getting kicked out. We're talking about East Oakland, but all of Oakland really, right? Like Black and brown folks have been kicked out for, decades at this point because of gentrification and not being able to afford stuff, not having access to good jobs. And so that creates a disconnected community where you have someone on your block, switching in and out every year or faster. And so it's like the things that keep us safe are actually the ways that we get to take care of each other, the way we get to stay together and connected with each other. And that part is what's at risk.
Right. And it's interesting that like we all can come to agreement. Yeah, for sure. I want a neighborhood where I know my neighbors. I want a neighborhood where I feel like I can go from my house to wherever my the end destination is and feel good. I want a neighborhood where someone's going to have my back if something goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
We all in a normal day-to-day conversation would not define public safety as more police, right? And the reality is like the framework of what we actually fundamentally believe public safety is like prevent things from happening, right? Whether it's the broken leg or someone, taking stuff from you. And I'll just lift it up, or even the car crashes that have become more prevalent in the neighborhood because people drive in ways that maybe not safe for everyone. I ain't gonna vilify because we all done had the moments where we're trying to rush to get to the destination, and we all know we done some things. Don't act like y'all didn't. But I do think that there is a general underlying thing of I'm going to live in an awareness that my actions have a larger contribution to my neighborhood and my larger community. And that I am a part of a community that we want to be safe, right? And at the core of what we're defining as public safety is a much broader prevention, intervention, repair framework than just a vilify, lock them up, mass incarcerate, framework, right? And then I also hear you saying that, it's also like, yeah, I do want to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, I broke my leg. Someone come and take me to the hospital because I can't drive to the hospital, right? So that's a whole different part of the conversation, which I do hear sometimes being mentioned in Oakland when we refer to the fire department and their massive role in our emergency response system as the first responders, actually. And people, I think understand that, but want to name that exclusively that, I remember sitting and hearing the fire chief talk about what it meant to close fire stations, particularly in the flatlands, and the danger to our elders of that, not just the prevention of fire, but the actual advancement of access to emergency response, access to first responders. And so there's also a part of this public safety narrative that is disservicing the folks who are actually doing, I would offer, the hardest part of public safety, which is being responsive to those moments that are really prevalent in our community because of the environmental injustices. So we have a lot of elders with asthma and a lot of health issues that are directly connected to the quality of our air, the quality of the buildings that we're living in, the quality of the neighborhoods that we're in, and whether they're near pollution or not. And so I do see our, radical left, whatever we want to define, a progressive stance, is looking at public safety from a much broader perspective than just, we got to intervene when someone commits a crime, right? And I think that what's lost in Oakland is that when you turn the news on, when you talk to the average politician, when you talk to even community leaders, it's like, well, we got to do something about the violence. We got to do something about the violence. But when we go out in the hood and we talk with folks and we say, hey, what do you want to do? How do you want to address this? They're saying, hey, we know mental health is a big issue, right? That folks are feeling the weight of this political moment, the economic moment that we're in. And they want jobs and they want youth programs. Big demand for youth programming. There's a real awareness that there's nothing for young folks to do in Oakland. Even for my kids, right? 15 and 22. You don't have a lot of activities to engage and stimulate young folks, which leaves opportunity for a lot of things to become popular and not popular, right? And so I just think that we all have a responsibility to start pushing back against this narrative that policing will solve all. I ain't never seen a police officer take nobody to a damn hospital or frankly even rescue someone from a burning car, if we're going to be really honest, right? Some of these things that, happen, and I'm not saying that to vilify all police. I think there are many who do good public service, but the reality is the police can't be the solution for every damn thing.
Exactly.
Right. And that's why we have so many different programs that need continued support and investment. We saw what happened when the city divested from ceasefire. We saw or continue to see the lack of services people can get when there's no support for, services like macro. Even looking at our nonprofit organizations that do the violence prevention work, right? That recently were a part of the cuts. And so if leadership doesn't believe in any of, those approaches, whether it's through community organizing and holistic approaches, and you're only thinking one track, which is police, we have lived in the Oakland Bay Area for decades and have seen these repetition that really has not offered any solutions to public safety.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think coming from a lot of Asian immigrant community and refugee communities too, it's with the language barrier thing, a lot of our folks will call police. Well, I'll say this. It's very rare for them to call the police. When they do, then they turn into the ones being questioned. And, and so they're the ones who are looking for help. But because of language barriers and other things and biases, they end up being the ones being questioned and feeling unsafe. And so that has happened a lot. We also think about well, what are the police patrols? Where are they spending their time and how are they spending their time? Right. And so it's we have limited resources going around and there is a big mismanagement problem. Right. And that also needs to be addressed. And so there's a piece that you all were talking about of we can't rely on the police to do every single thing. So we are talking about what are some of the things that we can take off of the police plate so then they can really focus on the things that we need them to work on. And that is a money conversation, that is a social orientation conversation. But at the end of the day, it's who does the police, you're saying, who does it serve? And when they get to the situation, how do they actually address it and not create more harm? But I think a lot of times, whether you're the victim or survivor looking for help or whatever it is, it's the police come and they actually create more trauma. And so when we talk about the real heinous kind of violence that happens in our communities against each other, what we're really talking about is trauma. And the fact that our communities don't have resources to navigate that trauma in a healthy way, in a supported way. Because it's not just about like finding them a therapist and, okay, you're good. It's like, okay, you need the emotional mental health support, but you also need to have secure housing. You need to have a good job that will pay you, that also treats you well at work, that you're not getting further like polluted at work. And then I feel like in the conversation too, it's like, who gets to talk about like the ways that we get to be safe from big polluters? Like there's like water toxic things in our schools where our children are like drinking contaminated water. There's like air quality issues all over Oakland, East and West especially, but Chinatown as well, where it's like you don't see it because we still get blue skies and sunshine, but you're breathing in toxic air that leads to asthma, leads to like other health defects and all these things. But we don't talk about that as a public safety issue either, right? Because at the end of the day, those are like the big corporations that are like stealing our lives literally, but also stealing our money in other ways, like especially with this federal administration. Like they're taking our money in other ways, but police isn't going to stop that kind of crime, right? No. And so it's hyper focused on this type of I would say like the symptoms of poverty and symptoms of like struggling through these economic times, mostly Black and brown folks, also immigrant and refugee folks that are survivors of war. US made war in other countries and why they're here to survive, and we have so much trauma that we're dealing with and navigating through, and scarcity and fear. And that doesn't get to be in the conversation when we're looking at like city budgets and how many more like sworn officers do we need to have on our streets.
Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing in the frame of trauma, because I think that the dynamic of trauma, particularly in Oakland, if we're connecting from the 90s till now, there's been a traumatic war on poverty executed in Oakland. Particularly in redline communities where they would only allow Black and brown and immigrant communities to live, and the ways they've used the law, whether it's state law, federal law, local laws, to vilify those communities, vilify our communities to be communities that have to be over policed, that have to have particular laws, like gang injunctions was a big thing in the late 90s, early 2000s. 3 strikes, you're out. It's a huge cause of mass incarceration here in California. And all of those policies really compact and, I like to say, put a foot on the neck of people, particularly in Northwest and East Oakland, right? Never the hills, right? So when we talk about who public safety is or isn't benefiting, it's never going after folks who, frankly, make over a certain income and live in certain neighborhoods, right? But it is in service of protecting it. And I'll never forget that, like, you cannot ignore that the communities where redlining occurred, if you overlay the police beat map, if you overlay the health equity maps, and this is all stuff that's available, right? You can go to the Alameda County Public Health Department, you can go to the Oakland Police Department and get these maps. If you overlay those maps over the redlining, you see a direct correlation, right? That the hot spots where police beats are the strongest, or where they supposedly put the most policing, are some of the same communities where they have concentrated not only polluters, where they have concentrated not only, anti-tenant protections, it's very insidious. And again, people always say, oh, conspiracy theory. Oh, it's not, it's proof. There is proof. There is legal precedents for us to say these things, because they are often used across each of the systems, right? The legal system, the judicial system, it really hides it in some ways if you're not a lawyer. But it's also in our city government, right? That, We have built our housing policy. We have built our environmental protection policies. We've given credit and removed fees from corporate real estate in certain communities to be able to build there some low income housing that doesn't meet standards, right? We lack enforcement. There's all these
It's
different
endless.
ways that it keeps, it's like an endless,
Yeah.
system that makes sure that people stay poor. Poor people are policed, and the real roots of poverty are never addressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like, when we connect that all in talking about the political conservative strategy to really vilify Oakland, to make Oakland seem like it is indeed the ground zero for making sure nothing progressive moves forward, what we're really talking about is that conservatives do not want us to come up with solutions to address poverty, to really push and advance the idea that we have human rights, right? And that we have the right to, clean air. We have the right to good quality education. We have the right to health access. We have the right to housing that's free from contamination, and that's underneath this narrative of public safety, right?
Right.
But we can't get there because we get caught up in but there's so much crime, right? There's
Right.
so much violence, and I don't feel safe, even when that violence is not happening directly in the communities. And I would say over this last several years, frankly, the only reason that the narrative in the hills has shifted is because people started going up in the hills. If it had never happened post the pandemic or even during the pandemic that folks were actually experiencing some types of violence in their neighborhood, they wouldn't have cared if it was happening in the flatlands or not. And we have to be real about that. And I challenge a lot of the residents in the hills, particularly when I ran, to be like, are you only concerned about it because it's come up the hill? Because you was definitely not concerned about it in the 90s. You was definitely not concerned about it. You wasn't at city council asking for more police then. You were absolutely positively okay with the war on poverty because it didn't touch you. Now that it's touching you, all the resources of policing, even when there are solutions that community is advocating for, end up being still prioritized to the most privileged. Right. So they got the, safety patrols. They got the, what were they, neighborhood ambassadors first, even though the majority of the violence actually was in the flatlands and the merchant corridors in the flatlands. So even when the solutions are generated from community, they end up still being prioritized to the privilege in the hills, even before the flatlands where the need is even greater. So it's such a insidious, like, effed up cycle. I don't know if I want to say effed up for real, but y'all know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle and that nobody benefits from. At least the impacted folks don't benefit from. So all of these different policy changes under the guise of public safety, and there still isn't any change. But yet you still have officers making hella overtime, right? You have retired officers, with these big payouts, and you have, OPD under all of these different, lawsuits, which we are all paying for.
Oh, man.
And we're not getting the needed services that we have been asking for, just for public safety overall. But they say crime pays, right? It's the only people that's getting paid for crime are the actual police, these different packs, and we're continue getting divested from. And so, in 2003, $10.9 million went to pay out 119 plaintiffs in police department for a settlement. There was more than $57 million that was paid through 2001, 2011 to alleged victims of police abuse. The largest sum that's been paid out. From 2018 to 2023, Oakland Police paid out roughly $1.7 million for cases involving uh, wrongful death, lawsuits. Um, 2023, Oakland Police paid out roughly $1.7 million for cases involving wrongful death, 2023, Oakland Police paid out roughly $1.7 million for cases involving wrongful death, 2023, Oakland Police paid out roughly $1.7 million for cases involving including that, of Oscar Grant.
Yeah.
We can even go back further. In the 90s, Tupac Shakur
Yeah.
won a settlement against OPD for police brutality. He was brutally beat by OPD for jaywalking. So that doesn't speak public safety, that speaks terrorism. And Oakland historically has a history of terrorizing Black people through the police department. Our police department was pretty much brought here from the South.
Yep.
From the racist South.
Yep.
And that's what it was founded off of. And so, how have our communities protected ourselves? How do we keep ourselves safe from OPD violence? We have organizations doing work, but more than that, how do you think we can keep our community safe aside from relying on the police?
I mean, I think this happens in all communities, but I'll just speak to like in immigrant communities that I've seen is like you come to a new place, you just try to figure out how to like adapt to this environment, and you just find your people. They could be family members, but they could be like friends of a friend of a friend that just you have a shared background, so you look out for each other. And it's like the simple things. I always laugh because it's such an auntie thing where it's like, oh, there's a sale at Trader Joe's on eggs, you should go get it, right? They have this network already set up. Same network that's going to be like, hey, there's something happening on this block, stay away. Or like, hey, so-and-so just went through something, like we should like all pull together and like bring them some food. And so like that thing and that piece is something that we talk a lot around community resilience. On a day-to-day, you're just like looking out for each other, having fun, thinking about like how to get the best deal sometimes. But then in moments of crises or emergency or in times of harm and recovery, like you use that same network, that same social network to be like, hey, how can I help you out? How can we look out for each other? How can we like take care? In Chinatown, I feel like we've talked a lot about community ambassadors, which is something that we learned from Black communities. That's something that has happened in other neighborhoods. But it's like, how can we have folks on a day-to-day whose role is just to help people find where to go, right? Like maybe you want to find that one shop or you're looking for a really particular restaurant. They can help you out. And then maybe you have folks who are unhoused or like maybe going through a mental health crisis. And like, how can you have someone whose role is to make sure that they have water and they're hydrated, that they're staying safe and not running into the street. And then in the meantime, can call on programs like Macro or other things to come get them services. And so we want to think about community ambassadors as like wayfinders for the community and neighborhood, both for folks living there, but also folks who come in and out. We go into each other's neighborhoods all the time. And sometimes you're like, oh, I just want to figure out where do I go to play basketball, right? Someone can help you find that. And then in moments of crises or something's happening, you have more folks who are just like ready on the street to respond. And that's not to react. It's not to like get, throw themselves in danger, but it's like, hey, when there's more folks around, it's just less likely to have something pop off, And so in that, we also think about community ambassadors as like a beautification project. You might not always have someone to like help wayfind, so you have some extra time, go ahead and pick up that trash or like help sweep the street or like remove that graffiti, because that beautification and the landscaping actually helps people feel safe. I won't say that we've gone so far yet, but there's other organizations that also think about like, how do you introduce more green space into this like really urban environment. We've had a lot of young people that are like, I just want to see more trees, especially in East Oakland. It's like, I just want to see more trees and green. I want to see more flowers. And that helps me feel more calm. And so we forget that all of those pieces combined together, like the physical environment plus the like human to human experience where people just say hi to each other, allows us to like feel more safe and like feel cared for. We're doing a program with our members around public safety and like all these different workshops. And having them get a chance to meet folks who are incarcerated in San Quentin, and also thinking about other programs afterwards. And so many times our members come out of that program and it's like, oh yeah, I thought public safety was really about police, but I totally see
Right.
now that like public safety is about care. It's
Mm-hmm.
about how do we create these systems and networks of care for each other, because they go into these conversations and they meet people and they reflect on their own experiences, and it's like there were all these different signals to show me that like I could have done something different instead of making that bad choice.
Mm-hmm.
But no one saw it. No one cared enough about them to like intervene. So they made that bad choice and now they're being punished. And then once they get out, it's like this like huge scar that everyone sees, or I'm sure that's how it feels, of like I did something wrong and I can't ever like make up for it.
Mm-hmm.
But like you do. There is a process of accountability that once you have done something and you've learned from it, atoned from it, paid back it, that like you do have to be welcomed back into the community, and you also have to see your role as a part of the new care team so that other folks don't do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like those are the things that are really lovely to talk about, and at the end of the day are small. You know, it does start with like 3, 5, 10 people, but it can grow. And I feel like that's the thing, is like we need to invest in those types of communities of care, networks of care that can then grow to hundreds and thousands. But we can't do that when our millions of dollars are being spent on this whole other system.
That's right.
That
Right.
just tears us apart.
Yeah.
And I know this happens in East Oakland too, in the Black community, but I know that happened in Chinatown, especially around the rise of anti-Asian hate, right? It's like Chinese folks were like, okay, to be honest, I don't really call the police anyways because I don't know how to talk to them and they don't really do much for me. But if I don't show up right now to be like, I want police, then they're going to like not care about our communities even more. They're going to like totally ignore me. And so there was this divide of like our communities that we need to back the police 100% no matter what, because if we don't, then it's just going to get worse for us. And the police are just going to treat us even worse. And then there was another group that we were more a part of that's like, police is part of it, and we need to hold our ground to save everything else, from housing to healthcare to mental health to parks and recreation, because that's what keeps us safe. And that felt like this constant tension.
Yeah.
And living in East Oakland, like I heard these conversations kind of parallel, because folks in East Oakland were like, police don't care about us. Every time I call, they never respond, blah, blah, blah. And so you had this dynamic of like, I can only get support and care if I throw my weight and my support fully behind this thing that I don't really like, that doesn't really support me, but it's the only thing I can think of, because we didn't have enough space or projects to talk about alternatives that work, because they feel so small. But again, it's like, and I think this is one of the principles of environmental justice and just transition, is like actually all the small things working in tandem and creating this ecosystem allows for us to like bloom and really work well. But we can't see those things working well when we don't get the support and investment into them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I'm glad you brought in the framework around just transition, because I think a lot of us understand that the way that society is functioning on the long term is not going to produce a world that we are going to be proud to hand to our next generations, right? And that there has to be a rethinking overall in what it means to be in a world that is literally, a planet that has to be cared for as well, and that we are also, stewards of that care, right? And expanding that framework into being stewards of care within the community is really important, because at the end of the day, the connection to where our electeds are making their decisions is these are our resources. These are our tax dollars. These are the things we are giving them permission to budget on. And when there is this massive disconnect between what do we actually need to steward and care for our communities in the ways that we really envision and really want and are based on our values, versus what is the dominant conservative agenda telling us is the real solutions that they want us to advance, because they have a profit they will make from those solutions. Policing is a profit-based solution. right? Because they often don't live in our communities. They live in other communities that are mostly affluent, where they go and they pay taxes that do not benefit our communities either. But also that incarceration is expensive, right? It is very expensive to do policing. It is very expensive to lock people up. It's more expensive to lock people up than it is to house people. And we have to have real conversations about, particularly here in Oakland, that our tax dollars, majority of our general fund, majority of all of our funding in the city of Oakland goes to policing. Second to policing is fire. And we're talking about, 100, almost, I think it's 125 plus million dollars is spent of our city budget on policing. And yeah, for the last 2 years, they've been able to say and justify it because they've been like, oh, burglaries are up, theft is up, violent crime is up. But recently, that myth has been busted, right? That crime has actually been steadily going down. It was going down last year when they gave OPD more overtime spending. It's now gone down again. And so then when you have the inspector general and you have the police commission coming to council saying, actually, the problem around overtime is that y'all ain't checked the policy on how overtime can be accrued. We got to have real conversations about that. When the inspector general is saying, here are policies that council needs to shift and change, and the city administrator needs to be held accountable for implementing, and it still goes each budget cycle now, 3 cycles now, not addressed. We got to have real conversations. What allows our electeds to continue to spend hella money, and I mean hundreds of millions of dollars, on the fact that a small number of officers are walking away with salaries of almost $500,000 or more? That has to be criminalized, right? Because we're not even talking about everyone on the force getting, look at me, people. Okay, let's have a conversation, okay? Because I don't know about you, but if I'm making $500,000 in overtime, it's a problem. I'm just gonna call it what it is, because it's not okay. It is not okay that even 10 individuals on the payroll of the city of Oakland as Oakland police officers are walking out of our city making over $500,000 in the name of policing, when we have so many unhoused, when we have children who were barely able to get fed this summer, when we had tenant rights organizations and immigrant organizations and everyone, tenants union, we had young folks, everyone coming to city council saying, hey, we need resources for these services that actually do keep us safe. And that council made a consistent choice to ignore the demands of community in the name of funding basic essential services without being critical around how that basic services are being exploited by a few, right? So I do think we want to name these issues. And I know, again, we can talk on and on about it, but I wanted to make sure that we are being really critical that the overfunding of policing in this tough on crime narrative that's been pushed is in the complete opposite demand from where community truly has identified the needs for investments. And if we don't continue this conversation and get critical around where those investments are going, we're going to continue to see a mismatch between what we pay into our taxes in our city government to really resolve and what is actually happening in our community. And the things that are keeping us safe are doing that. They're bringing crime down. We don't have enough time right now to go into some of the theories behind. But as we come to a close, let's go around, do final thoughts, because there's, so much more to say.
So much more. And a lot of good points were made. I think we can all agree the way that we currently define public safety doesn't keep communities safe. Police culture is very reactionary instead of preventative. They're not preventing the actual crimes. And the status quo does not invest in the people, but instead reinforces policies that further incarcerate people. We have seen that with the past election in 2024, with the passing of new propositions that further incarcerate people, coinciding with the building of more prisons to incarcerate people for being poor. And so I don't see police keeping us safe, and these policies aren't creating better solutions for our young people.
Absolutely. You're right. Last thoughts, Alvina?
So many thoughts. Something that I don't feel like we got to touch on much, but like in this moment too, where people are getting disappeared and picked up and abducted, a lot of that is also a law enforcement issue, right? And that it's like police supporting ICE to detain people, and that it's prisons that we already have and more detention centers that they want to build, more millions and billions of dollars. And in all of that too, I feel like they're doing it indiscriminately. Like, you look brown, you look black, you're just gonna get kettled in, and then we'll figure out your citizenship later, right? So it's all this narrative around like, oh, it's like trying to get the criminal folks off the street, but it's really just like to keep us off the streets. And we have so many different cases of that. I won't get into it too much, but I think the piece that it all like comes down to as well is like what we're continuing to put our money into is this system of fear that I can't trust you and you can't trust me so many times. And like all these conversations about police overtime and why we don't have enough officers, blah, blah, blah. It's like this narrative that like police also have to be scared of us. That's their job, is to be scared of us, right? And that's why they're so reactive. But the thing is, we're also scared of them, right?
Fear on fear.
Yeah, and so in these ways of like, what do we actually put our money to? Where do we like invest our resources and time? It's like, how can we keep leaning into like a community that loves and trusts each other, that looks out for each other and cares for each other, and then has fun and creates culture and art together, right? I think that's what we want to get to. On my way over here, I was thinking like, every time we ask our members, like, what's your vision of your future? What's the vision of like an environmentally healthy and like just future? It's always really green. There's bikes, there's old people and young people. There's usually a garden in there, a lot of housing, but none of those visions have police in them, because in the future of like this just and healthy world, we wouldn't need systems like that to like protect us from each other, because we are caring for each other. And it's like, that's what we need to keep moving towards, and not this like constant state of fear and scarcity and like danger, because the more we put money into that, the more it's just going to happen. Anyways.
So get the fear out of our lives, fear of each other, fear from police to us, and center in care. I can't say it any better that care is at the center of keeping everyone safe. Not this narrative that the conservatives are advancing, that we have to fear each other, that we have to lock people up because of that fear. So lots of rich conversation. Thank you so much, Alvina, for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining. And thank you all for joining us for another episode of Town Politics. This was brought to you by Oakland Rising Action. If you want to continue supporting, have more of these podcasts, make sure you follow us on all the socials, Spotify, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of Town Politics.
Ain't no power like the power of the people. We keep us safe, showing love to my equal. Ain't no power in the hour of the evil. Had to turn the news off and never showing we peaceful. I had to turn the news